Okay, hi everybody. I'm Terry Lee Bulger. Thanks for coming tonight. It's great to see so many people come out for an online event. Guess it's becoming our new reality. So I'm the publisher for the Acorn Press, and I've been working with Susan White for, I guess it's 10 years now. Her first book was published by me. It was the book, The Year Mrs. Montague Cried, which ended up winning the Anne Connor Brymer Award that year, which was pretty amazing for her first book. And she just hasn't stopped ever since. This year will be her 10th book. So that's almost a book a year ever since the very first one. She writes wonderful books for young people, and then is also now writing wonderful books for adults. 2 of her adult books have been up for the Mrs. Dunster's Writers Prize for Fiction in New Brunswick, the New Brunswick Book Awards, which is the top book prize in New Brunswick. So I think that's pretty amazing as well. And she's now foraying into her first fantasy novel that's coming out pretty soon. It's just being copy edited now, and we're ready for to send it to the printer. So it's pretty exciting. So I just wanted to check with you, Susan. Was I going to ask a few questions first, or are you going to read first?
No, I think I'll do my preamble and read first, and then we'll stop midway and get some questions, if that's okay.
That's great. Yeah.
All right.
So I'm going to ask a few questions, and then then at the very end you can open it up to questions from the group, right? All right. So if you want to take it on, Susan, we're very thrilled to be working together. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much. I want to thank, first of all, the Writers Union of Canada. This is a national public reading, which I applied for and was given, so that normally would be done in a library or a public setting. But as Terry Lee said, this is our new normal, and I'm getting a little bit better at it. So I hope things will go all right tonight. I am celebrating tonight 10 years. My first book, as Terry Lee mentioned, was published in 2011. And I did make the statement at my first launch that I planned on writing a book a year for the next 20 years, which surprised some of my family, but that's my goal. And I am pretty much a little bit ahead of schedule. There was one year we didn't put anything out, but we've made up for it this year by having 2 releases coming, one in the spring and one in the fall. 10 years as a published writer, but many more years writing and dreaming of being a writer. It's a long and sometimes daunting process, but as Budge Wilson said, if you stick to your guns and you don't give up, your work will shine through. And I'm pleased tonight to celebrate the work that has surfaced and share it with you tonight. The Year Mrs. Montague Cried was published in 2011. I took a deferred leave from teaching in 2006 and 7 to write it. I sent it to 5 publishers and received 5 rejection letters, some nicer than others. And I entered the manuscript in the Atlantic Writing Competition in the fall of 2009. And at the same time sent it to the 6th publisher, which was Acorn Press, which Terry Lee had just taken over not too long before that. The manuscript won first place. And I received an email from Terry Lee, and about 2 weeks later, I was offered a contract for my first book. So that was thrilling, and really it's been definitely the stepping stone to where I am today. And I really appreciate that. I thank Terry Lee for coming tonight to host, and also I thank her for all she does for me, and Jen as well, and all the people behind the scenes at Acorn and at Nimbus. And I was proud that the Year Mrs. Montague Cried won the Anne Connor Brymer Excellence in Children's Literature in 2012. And as a teacher for 29 years, reading children's literature to hundreds of kids, that was probably one of my proudest moments. I'm going to read I'm going to read from each book, just one short selection from each book. So I'm going to begin with The Year Mrs. Montague Cried. March 13th. Yesterday, right at the beginning of math class, Mrs. M started to cry. We already had our math books out, and she was at the board ready to teach the lesson when she just started crying. I remember thinking, what is it about this math lesson that is making her so sad? She had seemed fine just a second ago when she told us to open to page 157. When she spoke, her voice was very low, but by that time, her tears had everyone's attention, and there was not a sound in the room. I am not leaving, she said. We are not going to go get anyone. I am going to stop crying, and I need you all to help me. I want you to start the subtraction questions on page 92. I am going to pull myself together, and when I can, I am going to teach today's lesson. She went over to her desk and sat down. No one said that we had already done the questions on page 92. As we started copying the subtraction questions into our books, Mrs. M sobbed. The sound of her sobbing was at first enough for us to know that she wasn't ready to get back up and teach. But as the few moments went by and the crying got calmer, head slowly bobbed up between copying and subtracting to see how she was making out pulling herself together. I had 9 questions done when she stood back up and walked to the front of the room. We closed our notebooks and sat up straight as Mrs. M began a lesson on improper fractions. Toward the end of the class, Mrs. M stopped us and said, "Thank you so much for helping me this morning. With your help, I got through without having to go home or having to get someone to come in." She explained how the sadness sometimes comes over her like a wave, and I completely understood what she was saying. When I swim in the lake on a really windy day and the water is rough, I'll be floating on my back like I always do, and a wave will suddenly come over my face. I spit and sputter, turn over quickly, and work at getting my breath back. I understand sadness too. When I look at Corey, it makes me feel so sad. I want him to be like he was, and I want to feel like I used to feel. I want to tease him, tickle him, and get mad at him. I want him to just be him, and me to just be me. I retired from teaching in 2009 and began working on 10,000 Truths. I believed that if I was going to be an author, a full-time author, I had to give up teaching and devote my time and efforts to that. So I began writing 10,000 Truths that fall at the same time that I got the manuscript, The Year Mrs. Montague Cried, ready for the Atlantic writing competition. The 10,000 Truths was published in 2012. I was thrilled when 10,000 Truths was selected as one of the New Brunswick books in Amy Mather's 2014 Marathon of Books. And I'm going to read a short passage from 10,000 Truths. They turned left after getting off the ferry and drove up a curving road with a steep cliff wall on the passenger side. Rachel watched a rush of water gushing down the side of the rock face. The river wound as far as she could see out the driver's side window. She stared at it until they came to the top of a hill and the road turned away from the blue expanse of water. A brown church set off to the left, surrounded on 2 sides by a fenced-in graveyard. For a second, Rachel thought of that other graveyard, the one where her mother and brother were buried. Even though she had only been back there that one time when her so-called grandmother took her there a week after the funeral, she remembered it clearly. She remembered standing there staring at the ground where just days before her mother and brother's caskets had been lowered in holes under those 2 mounds of dirt. How could 2 small mounds of dirt be the only sign of the deep holes where she knew her mom and brother were now? She hadn't really even been able to say goodbye that day because her grandmother had hurried her back to the car. Mrs. Thompson turned at a sign that read Walton Lake Road. She slowed right down to 20 kilometers an hour as the narrow road was dirt and very rough, which just seemed to make the drive more painful and foreboding. Rachel had no idea what to expect. Her mind kept telling her she was going to a place from which she would never return. She would spend her life trapped in this forsaken place, and no one would hear from her again. Stop there. I started the sewing basket in 1995, and I wrote about 14 pages. I got back to it and saw it published in 2013. At this point, from all my books, the sewing basket has the distinction of being my daughter's favorite. I'm going to read a passage from the sewing basket. Home economics class was 3 classes long on Tuesday afternoons. Mrs. Harris, our teacher, wore a starched white coat as if she were a doctor or a mad scientist. She wore her hair curled tightly under an ugly hairnet for some reason, even though our first section was sewing, not cooking. We were going to make aprons. She passed out our supply list and announced with great ceremony what each item was: glass-headed pins, a pin cushion, hand needles, and a tape measure. She showed us sewing scissors, a seam ripper, and thimbles. She rolled a tracing wheel over tracing paper and showed the dotted lines as if they were ancient hieroglyphics. I always have a hard time with that word when I have to say it out loud, with an important message about civilization. Then she showed us tailor's chalk and thread snips and the crowning glory of sewing supplies, the sewing basket. She held one up that looked like it had seen better days and told us that she'd had this sewing basket for 30 years. Time for a new one, I figured. She showed us where all the sewing tools fit into each little section as proudly as if she'd given birth to it. The number 3544 simplicity pattern was the last thing on our supply list, and Mrs. Harris held up the envelope of the pattern to show us what we'd be making. We'd be sticking to the simple tie around the waist apron, not the other fancier styles. An apron was an apron, I figured, and nothing to get excited about. Who wore an apron anymore anyway? But to hear Mrs. Harris talk, we were going to create a work of art, and we could pick a lovely gingham check, a glorious floral print, or any of the other choices a good cotton blend would give us. She practically took the whole afternoon to tell us all we needed to know to start us on the path to becoming accomplished seamstresses. My rear end was sold on sewing since it was full of pins and needles from sitting so long in such a boring class. Tuesdays would be a day to get through, and I quickly decided that the cooking unit couldn't come fast enough. I began writing The Memory Chair in 1990 while I was on mat leave with my youngest son. It was published in 2015. The memories intertwined throughout the fictional story are my grandmother's. I workshopped the first 2 chapters of this book at a Maritime Writers Workshop in 1995 with author Joan Clark, and I was thrilled to be able to gift her a copy years later. The Memory Chair was shortlisted for an Ann Connor Primer in 2018, and it was a Hackmatack Children's Choice book in 2017. I'm going to read a short passage from The Memory Chair. It was always the smell that hit me when I walked into the back porch of Graham's house. It was an overpowering smell, musty and stale, a smell that hung heavy in the air of the small, cluttered, windowless room. I always felt more inclined to turn and run than to follow Mum through the next door into my great-grandmother's kitchen. Mum made weekly visits to Graham, but I never went along willingly. The smell in the porch always gave way to an entirely different odor once we entered the dark kitchen. I could usually feel the suffocating heat of the room and see steam rising from the silver kettle sitting on the kitchen wood stove. Often there were cookies and sometimes loaves of brown bread on the table, which explained the faint smell of molasses. But there was usually a lingering smell that stumped me, and the overall effect on my olfactory senses was never a pleasant one. Possibly it was the smell of old that always scared me. Old furniture, old carpets, old curtains, all the old things, always sitting in their same old places. And Graham, with her old house dresses, always covered with that old brown woolly sweater. I'm not sure if old actually has a smell, but I certainly thought it did. But even that smell was not the worst part of the visit to Graham's house. The torture always began during the drive to get there. I feel like I'm rushing, but it's going on fine. The Waiting for Still Water was published in 2016, and it picks up the stories of the characters in 10,000 Truths, picks them up 15 years later. I've started a third in this series called Jasper's Road, and it keeps getting put on the back burner, but someday I'll get back to it. And I'm going to read a short passage from Waiting for Still Water.
was also your first adult book,
Okay.
right?
Yes, this was my first adult book. You're a riot, Zach, aren't I? We took at least 50 pictures. We have to get a grip. I could barely leave the house to look after the animals. I didn't want to miss anything. Good thing I'm done in the woods until fall. I couldn't possibly leave them for a few hours at a time. We'll see how long that lasts, Zach. So Jody's doing okay with it? She is. I know having Jasper isn't going to make everything all right or take away the pain she feels, but she certainly seems ready to love Jasper. That can't be a bad thing. No, not a bad thing at all. Have you been in the house? No, I was just getting Jasper's diaper bag out when I saw you walking up the hill. How was the water? Fine. My mood, on the other hand, not so much. Why? What's wrong? I left the house in a hurry to keep from getting into something with Amelia. I've calmed down a bit, but I still can't believe that she threw me under the bus. What are you talking about? You won't believe who called this afternoon. Who? My grandmother. So your grandmother calls you all the time. Not my dad's mom, Hilda, my mother's mother, my grandmother Garna. Really? I didn't even know she was still alive. She's dead to me. I haven't seen or heard from her since I was 8 years old. How the hell did she even find me? It took me by surprise to even hear her name, Rachel continued. She was rambling on about, I don't even know what. I couldn't talk to her. I passed the phone to Amelia. It really floored me. I was a mess. I thought Amelia would put her in her place. I thought she would handle it. But what did she do instead? She's coming here on Saturday. Hilda is. Amelia just came in from the veranda and matter-of-factly announced that she was coming here on Saturday. She could have at least asked me. The only thing I can figure is that Amelia was mixed up. Maybe she thought it was my other grandmother. I suppose that's possible. You didn't ask her? No, I was so shocked. I just went upstairs and got on my bathing suit and left the house without even speaking to her. I was furious. Well, let's go in and see what she says. She usually has good reasons for doing what she does, and even with some of her recent behaviors, I'm still pretty confident in her wisdom. Zach put the strap of the diaper bag over one shoulder, then put his other arm around Rachel, and they walked into the house together. Get the picture, Rachel. Jody's taking pictures of Jasper's first visit, Amelia called out as Zach and Rachel entered the kitchen. His first visit, Rachel asked. Hasn't he been here for almost 2 weeks? Just humorous, Zach said. Okay, so now I think we're going to have a few questions.
That was a real trip down memory lane for me.
Me too.
I was thinking about the year Mrs. Montague cried, and how I remember talking to you about it, and you were saying how some other publishers had turned it down, and the topic was sort of maybe too dark for some publishers, and I remember having that conversation saying I'm not scared of that. And then it won the Ann Connor Brymer Award. So anyway, that's really I think that was really ironic. But what I mean, in that case especially, but so much of your writing has a personal you've written about personal experiences or have some things that are kind of related to personal experiences, or even the settings are very personal. So do you find it's therapeutic to write about some of these things and some of these sort of maybe tragedies that have happened in your life? Or
okay, right. I get asked that question a lot. I certainly I don't know that it's therapeutic. I do know, though, that it's something I need to do. It's something that feeds me or keeps me going or whatever. I've never been one to shy away from anything. And I mean, we all have tragedies and losses in our life. I don't claim to have the monopoly on that, but I don't shy away from it. And I sometimes, when you say about a topic that's dark, I've had, teachers that don't want to read it to their class or don't want me to talk about it when I go in to do school visits or whatever, that sort of thing. But then I've had the total opposite, where teachers are very open and very, and it always to me is a huge payoff to be real with our emotions and with things, because everybody has challenges in life. It's you don't get out of this life without it. I definitely I said that I had started some of those other books years ago, and but The Year Mrs. Montague Cried was a book I had to write first. I had to get out there first, and definitely the year I took off to write it was definitely a process of, I guess, some type of therapy. But I'm proud of it. I'm proud of what it brings out in other people when they read it, more than I'm proud of it for my own therapeutic. And anyway, that's, I guess that answers the question in my long rambling way.
Was that the most challenging book for you to write, or was it a different one?
Well, the most challenging, perhaps, personally, in some ways, but certainly not as far as the craft of writing goes. I'd say that probably The Fear of Drowning was the most challenging, just to find how to go about those, presenting those 6 generations of women. So, and I say it's like anything else. The more you do, the better you get at it. Better you get at it. That doesn't sound very good, but the better you become. So, so yeah, they all, I guess, have their challenges, but the challenge to find the time and make it happen, and definitely the challenge to have it published and all that. So yeah, yeah, they all, whatever. Yeah, next.
One just popped up in the chat, but I was going to ask you before we get to that is what your writing routine is. You kind of touched on that a little bit, how it's challenging to kind of get into the research and how you get better at that. Do you have a specific routine you use each time, or is there something?
Yeah, I definitely have a routine, time-wise or seasonally wise. I always say that I write from September to June. I go back to my desk the day the teachers go back. I do the same in the same cyclical way of seasons as I did as a teacher. And I write usually till the end of June and take the summer off. I try to write 4 days a week, and pretty much, go to my office in the morning and stay there till supper time. Have my lunch in my office. I do go for my walk in the afternoon, which is part of my writing process. But I'm not as, I'm very flexible. I mean, and really staying home for COVID has not been a challenge, because I love to be home anyway. So yeah, but I don't write a lot in the evening, or I don't write, if I do have some edits to finish or whatever, but my deadlines are pretty friendly. They're not usually really, I'm not usually frantic to get something done. But I want to write when I want to write, but I've always got something, I've got two that are started, and I've got just applied for a research grant to do one that in the fall. I hope to do some real heavy research on the one that I want to start after that grant is through.
Do you like plot out the novel first, or does the novel speak to you as you're writing, or is there
it definitely speaks to me as I'm writing, but I have the bones of it. I kind of know where it's going, what the story, yeah, but it definitely speaks to me as I write it. But I have an idea and go from there. Yeah.
Has it ever changed, like halfway through, or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I would say, yeah. I don't know if like major changes, but definitely it's taken different directions than what I thought it was going to.
So the question in the chat, Ida's asking how you keep yourself in the mood for writing, especially during the pandemic.
Right. I'll be honest, there are days that I don't get a whole lot of, my husband always says, did you get any new words written today? Because I always use the line, books don't write themselves. And I'll be happy I'm always happy when I get new words, but I'm always I do feel very privileged to have the time to show up to write. And again, I don't feel the pressure to, I got to have a book out, I got to finish it. Sometimes books finish themselves quicker than I think they're going to, but not because I'm under any pressure, mostly just because I'm, really the writing just takes off. But the mood, if I only do revisions, if I only read what I wrote, last week and keep working on it, then I still feel I'm making progress. So I don't really have to be in the mood. I walk a lot. I usually take a good hour every afternoon, and often come up with things and where the next direction I'm going to go in while I'm walking. So, you know,
You
and
kind of
if
write
I'm
in
not
your
in the
head
mood,
as you're going, you mean, like as you're
yeah,
walking instead
for
of writing?
sure. If I'm not in the mood, I'll go have a nap or, you know, whatever. Like, I don't pressure myself and to be in the mood. But, and hi, Ida. It's really nice to see you or hear you.
Well, there's one more question in the chat that we'll do, and then you maybe want to read a little bit more. Is that the
Okay.
plan?
Okay, sure. Yep.
So Riel is wondering about if you've ever completely abandoned a manuscript.
Yeah. Hi, Riel. Well, I say, you know, I've got this Jasper's Road. Jasper was adopted in Waiting for Still Water, and he's 13, and I've got a really, I think, you know, half decent storyline to go with it. I can't seem to dig into it. I'm like on page 50, and I just keep. I haven't abandoned it altogether, but I definitely, it's not. It hasn't taken over and found its way. But I got a few things that I've never gotten back to. So I'd say, yeah, maybe. Thought I had a great, you know, children's, you know, picture book, but that hasn't really become my forte, and it might someday. But there's one I used to tell a story to my kids years ago, and I always thought that would make a good picture book, and I might get back to it. So I haven't like abandoned anything and said, oh, that, you know, I never want to see that again. But certainly I sometimes put it on hold or forget about it for a while. Okay, I'll go back to some reading then.
All right.
The next book that came out was another adult book, Maple Sugar Pie. Is that where I am? Yeah. The character, I get asked a lot about, you know, who your favorite characters are. One of my favorite characters is Hazel in Maple Sugar Pie. I just love her. I loved her right from the start. And I say she's a combination of my husband and my sister-in-law, and anybody that knows them might see that in Hazel. I love this story. It's got a lot of family fractures, a lot of dysfunction, but there's a lot of forgiveness and hope and redemption at the end. And I love it too, because down in this corner, this beautiful young woman that's dancing in that photograph is or was a dear friend of mine, Gladys. And she passed away in October 2020 at age 96. This was taken of her in 1943. So she wasn't the character Vera, but it was that setting and that time period. And she came through in this book. So it was published in 2016. And Gladys always had it on her bedside table in her nursing home when she finally had to go into care. And she was very proud to show the cover of this to all her friends and family. So this book is special to me. I'm going to read a short passage from it. And you'll glimpse a little bit of Hazel and her feisty little personality. When I came back downstairs after using the dirtiest, most disgusting bathroom I have ever had to pee in, Mike and his grandmother were still standing at the back door. No tearful reunion or warm embrace had transpired while I was upstairs. What do you want? I don't want anything, Nan. We have a friend who lives on the old Reach Road. We were there and thought we may as well drive by and see you. Well, now, who would that be? Which house does he live in? Realizing his grandmother probably knew everyone who lived on that road, Mike quickly changed his story. Oh, that's not the road he lives on. It's near there, though. I stood wondering if I should put my sandals back on. It didn't seem like we were being invited in for a cup of tea or anything. I'm surprised you even remembered where I live. Your Uncle Duncan is the only one who ever comes to see me. Apparently, I didn't completely ruin his life. With the others, I'm sure it's always been a toss-up as to who they hate the most. Not in your mother's case, though. Everything was my fault. Her father could do no wrong. You know she's dead, right, Nan? Of course I know. She died on the 19th of January, 1998. I buried 2 children, and don't think there isn't a day goes by I don't grieve for both of them. Technically, you didn't bury my mother. You weren't anywhere near the graveyard, as I recall. What the hell would you know? You don't know a damn thing. I do know some minister I've never seen before took 20 minutes spieling out some bullshit to the 15 people gathered in some stupid chapel, and not one of those people was you or anybody else in mom's family. Is that what you came here for? I can't speak for anyone else, but if you came here looking for a fight, I'm not giving it to you. And don't think you're going to get an apology from me either. Took you long enough if that's what you're looking for. I'm not looking for anything. I was over here and thought I would show Jen where my grandmother lives. Seemed like a normal thing to do. Not that there is anything normal about my family. You got that right. Well, you may as well come in. If I'd known you were coming, I'd have baked a cake. Headliner was the next one, and it was published in 2018. Headliner was a story that was waiting to be written, and I wrote it about loss from the sisters' perspective, and it was published in 2018. Headliner was shortlisted for the MB Book Award, the Mrs. Dunster fiction, in 2019, which I was very proud of. And I'm going to read just a short passage from that. Chapter 1. Design your perfect home. Finally, I was starting my assignment for Mrs. Taylor's Family Dynamics class. All semester, I had listened to her droning on about everything from emotional intelligence to the telltale signs of domestic violence. An assignment asking you to fantasize about the perfect home should have been no big deal. Put a 50-inch TV in every room, add a hot tub and a state-of-the-art sound system, and you'd have a perfect home. But in my messed up head, all I could come up with were stupid ideas that mirrored just how totally screwed up my family was. A home appropriate for the Callahan family would have consisted of only a few rooms. The kitchen sure wasn't getting used much. You could make a peanut butter sandwich anywhere, and you could eat takeout and throw away the containers in any room. Mom definitely needed her bedroom and the bathroom, since she was always either in bed or taking a bath. Dad and Jenny would just need a place to keep their suitcases, not that they were ever home long enough to unpack. My room would stay, but the room across the hall from mine wasn't necessary. Nobody had even gone in Mike's room in the 10 months since he'd left on the bus trip with his orchestra. A perfect home would have been the home we'd had 10 months ago, but I didn't know it then. I was just the middle kid in a family that looked like everyone else's. Mrs. Taylor had started the semester with a chart on the smartboard showing all types of families. The family we had been was on the chart, but the family we were now was not. We were off the charts, so to speak. Fear of Drowning. Fear of Drowning was published in 2019. And this one, as I said, was challenging to write. It probably had 6 or 7 drafts. I don't keep hard copies of all my drafts. My drafts are quite fluid, although I'd have, a few on my computer, but I don't, like I said, stack them up and look at how terrible they were at the beginning. But this one took a lot of reworking. It's the story of 6 generations of strong, determined women woven through 100 years of history. It also was shortlisted. It was shortlisted last year for the Mrs. Dunster Fiction Award. I want to mention that Riel is shortlisted for that award this year, and I wish her luck. And I'm going to read a small passage from that. Mrs. Price kept me for 3 weeks after word of my parents' death reached us. Her voice faltered when she explained to me she was unable to stay any longer and could not take me with her when she returned home. She packed my small bag with a change of clothes and a few of my most treasured possessions. She laid out my cream-colored chiffon dress. I loved its frothy layer of ruffles, but I cried as I put it on, thinking of the day Mother had brought it home to me. I was crying even more as I pulled on my 10-button boots and covered my dress with my garnet-colored Melton cloth coat and donned my matching hat. If I'd known how thoughtlessly my precious clothes would be discarded, I might have chosen a less favored outfit. It wasn't just my clothes, of course, but the very life I knew that would be cast aside. And had I known that, my quiet crying would have been wailing, and I wouldn't have followed Mrs. Price so unceremoniously out the door of my beloved home into the back seat of the waiting motor car, and then later onto the platform at the train station. I would certainly not have fallen into an unworried sleep during the train ride to Kingston. But I quickly realized no amount of wailing or any other show of emotion would sway the sisters from their strict and precise attention to settling me into the residence I found myself in on May the 12th, 1906, just a few days before my 7th birthday. Firstly, I was instructed to change into a starched white blouse, its cuffs frayed and discolored, a tight, scratchy pinstriped jumper, gray tights, and scuffed brown loafers, a size too big for my feet. I was then marched into a room where my blonde curls were unceremoniously cropped close to my head. I held in my tears as I watched one of the women sweep my curls into a metal dustpan and throw them into the dustbin. The curls fell on top of the velvet hair ribbon Mrs. Price had tied into the large and showy bow I'd worn so proudly, thinking myself almost as pretty as my beloved mother. My last published book is When the Hill Came Down, and it was published amidst all the upheaval of a global pandemic. I got it in July, and it didn't have the fanfare that maybe I didn't have a launch, although I had one online that was fun in November. The seed of this story came in a dream. And I remember sharing that dream at the supper table, and my youngest son was quoted as saying it would be the end of Mom's writing career. So hopefully he's wrong on that. And I have some characters I love in this, and I'm pleased to read a small passage from that. I don't know why I have two bookmarks, but this is the one I picked. Okay. The walk across the field was silent. But when they stepped onto the wood road trail, Keefe started talking as if he had been rehearsing exactly what he was going to say. The words came out matter-of-factly and in a long, uninterrupted dialogue. My parents died when I was 3 weeks old. I have never even seen a picture of them. The house was destroyed and they were killed. Suffocated, they say, when the house collapsed and the mud came in. It sounds crazy, and I don't talk about it, but I want you to know what happened. People talk about it as if it was a horror movie. People tell the story like I was an extra or a prop, just an afterthought in the good story it makes when a whole house fills with the rushing flood of an avalanche of mud, rocks, and debris, knocking out windows and collapsing walls. She threw me out. They don't know for sure it was her, but I like to think it was. I landed on the roof of the veranda, and somehow I was still there when they found it on the ground hours later, wrapped up in a blanket and not even crying, my Aunt Helen always said. That's what they based their theory of me being simple on. A baby, wide-eyed and not even crying after dropping 2 stories must have some damage to his brain, plus the fact I didn't talk until I was 4 years old. I wanted to tell you the story myself. Excuse me. The damn story seems to be all anyone cares to know about me. You would think after 15 years it might fade, but instead it just gets better, more far-fetched, and more entertaining, apparently to everyone but me. I would be happy if I never heard the story again. I thought about not telling you and just enjoying knowing one person who doesn't know the story. But I figured you probably knew it by now anyway and wouldn't even show up. Why did you think I wouldn't show up if I knew it? I didn't hear it, by the way. The only thing I heard was that your parents were dead and you had been thrown out the window. Oh yeah, that's their favorite part. I only get teased about it a few times a day at school. It doesn't come up much when I'm working somewhere, although I have heard whispered references to it. And it's not only the kids. The teachers I've had like to bring it up in one way or another to explain any trouble I have, whether doing long division or failing a test on the British monarchy. It's either in a nice, sappy, pitiful way, like the poor little boy took an awful blow to his head, or the not so nice ones. He's dumb as dirt was a favorite of my grade 6 teacher. That's awful, Keefe. Oh, you get used to it. I'm not dumb, just so you know. There are lots of things I can do. Just so happens reading and spelling aren't 2 of them. I can do math, though, despite getting a little fetched up on long division in grade 4. It could have been the fact that Miss Harvey didn't know how to teach it. I'm not sure she even knew how to do it. Okay.
That's great. So of all those books, which one would you say that you are the most proud of?
Oh, that's a tough one. I get asked that a lot. And I always say it's kind of like saying which one of my kids, I'm most proud
What's your
of,
favorite? Yeah,
or my favorite. And it depends kind of. Right now, they'd say it's Caleb, but it changes. I'm proud of them all. I'm definitely proud of the first one because I made a plan to write it. I stuck to the plan. I got it written. I got it published. I'm proud of them all for their own, kind of where they were, where I was when I was writing them, and all that sort of thing. So I'm proud of this one. Like I said, Caleb said it would be the end of my writing career, and it did. It came from I dreamt that the mother there was a mudslide. The house was destroyed. The mother threw the baby out the window. That was the dream. And I took that small snippet and wrote a story around it. So I'm proud of how it turned out. So yeah, I'm proud of them all in their own way.
So, this is, quite a breadth of work. And, as you say, you're only partway through the plan.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's hope.
So as a more seasoned writer, and as you say, you feel like you're growing, as your writing career, as you're doing more and more books. But what would you say, what advice would you give to a more like a younger writer, not younger age-wise, but emerging writer, or somebody who hasn't as much experience as you have? Right.
That's a good question. And I mentioned Budge Wilson in my preamble, and as we know, she passed away on a week ago tomorrow, last Friday. And I had known of her work, and I've never met her personally, but in reading or looking at a lot of video clips in the last few days of interviews, and she was 56 when she started to write, I believe, or in her 50s anyway.
Yeah.
And her basic advice was the same to everybody, like you just have to do the work. And that's what I say to any emerging writer, that nobody's going to swoop in and do it for you. You've got to sit and do the work, and you've got to believe in your work. And if your work doesn't move you, it's not going to move anybody else. It doesn't make you laugh, doesn't make you cry. So I'd say, first of all, do the work, but be true to what the story you want to tell. And don't just start writing because you think, oh, wouldn't it be great to have a book with my name on it? Or just, or it'd be good to have a bestseller per se, or whatever, and make lots of money, because you don't make lots of money. But I'm not complaining about that either. But just you've got to do the work, and you've got to trust yourself, and then trust your editor, because that's really important in the finished product, and in making you a better writer. And I've had I think I always try to remember exactly. I think I've only had 3 editors: Caitlin and Sherry, and then Penelope. I've worked with Penelope for the last few books, and she's just amazing what she gets out of me, because she pushes me. So you got to push yourself, but you've also got to trust other people and pay attention. And if something, like in preparing this reading, and it's like I left a paragraph out in one of my readings, and I thought, in the revision, I may have left that paragraph out now that I know what I know. So you got to, like I said, do the work, but also pay attention to what makes, what works and what doesn't. So it's not, it's not an easy, and I guess, decide you want to do it for the right reasons, and then just do the work.
Which is kind of like, so Stella's asking about if you read many novels, or any books or whatever, as well as writing, which is kind of feeds into it, right? Like, would you say that kind of goes hand in hand?
Yeah, I think I was a stronger and more prolific reader years ago than I am now. And I'm not sure why that is. And I often, it sounds ridiculous and kind of self-centered, but I'll often, if I just feel like reading, I'll just pick up one of my books and read it, because I don't know. And it's not that I read other books now with a critical eye. I certainly, there's lots of books that I love. Maybe time-wise, I'm not reading as much anymore, but I think you have to be a reader to be, and I certainly was a reader all my, my growing up years. So I think it's important to be a reader if you want to be a writer.
Yeah, and
But
it comes out in your
not,
work
not
too,
so,
right?
yeah.
I mean,
And
there's a lot
not
of,
so much to, try to copy or whatever, but if you know what works for you when you read a book, like I often say, if I've enjoyed a book, I want to hug it at the end, and I don't want it to be done. I don't want it to be over. So that's what works for me when I'm reading. So I guess that's maybe what I feel works for me when I'm writing.
so that kind of goes into what Jan's asking about reading to your husband, and
Yeah.
and what
Yeah.
his opinion is. Like, do you listen to his?
Well, it's funny. I mentioned the character Hazel, and my son Caleb, he's got real wisdom, and he's got his father's sense of humor or whatever. But I remember when I was first starting Maple Sugar Pie, and he had come. We have a farm, and he was living away from the farm, and came to feed his animals, and he would come, and I'd say, "You got to come upstairs and meet Hazel," and he's like, "Mom, like if you think Hazel's real." But I remember when I read him the first passage, and it was actually that one where the girl went in to use the bathroom, and there was something in it, I don't remember what it was, but he said, "That doesn't sound right. Doesn't sound like that's what she would say," or whatever it was. But I get that from my husband too. A good friend of mine, Joan, and Hovey, my brain was going numb here. She always said her husband, I love this quote, she'd either say, "Well, there's nothing wrong with that," or he'd say, "That one's a little lumpy." And so he would give her his advice, and she misses that now that he's passed away. But my husband too would say, like, "No, that doesn't sound quite right," or whatever. And I think, and I'll say this as advice to a writer, you've got to read your work out loud, and you've got to hear it. So given an excuse to read it, if somebody's going to listen, is always good. And so, yeah, I do read to my husband whenever he's available.
And so there's just a few technical questions here, like writing by hand versus the computer.
I always write on the computer. Like I said, my drafts are quite fluid. I don't print out my draft copies. I used to. I mean, years ago when I'd send to a publisher, because I did send those first few chapters of The Memory Chair. The book wasn't even finished. I didn't know what I was thinking, what I was doing. But I had sent the first 20 pages or whatever. And I have the way long time ago the draft of The Year Mrs. Montague Cried, maybe. Because I may have sent that hard copy somewhere. I don't remember, but I don't send hard copies anymore. And I don't see the need of kind of filling up my office with a lot of paper. But I forget what the question was. Oh yeah, I always write on the computer. Yeah. I did see in the Budge Wilson interview that she always wrote longhand. She had a problem with her back, so she sat up in bed and wrote. And I think Riel writes longhand a lot of the times. And I certainly make lots of notes. And I have every time I start a book, I have a journal for that book, and make lots of notes and make lots of like how old they are and how old they'll be in 5 years, and different notes in that book. So, but as far as writing the manuscript, I write it on the computer.
And are they mostly written from the first point of view? I think they are, but not all of them.
Mostly, not all of them, no. But mostly some third person and some, and mostly in the I had a real hard time with past and present and getting my tenses mixed up, and Penelope will tell you that was one of my bugaboos at the beginning. But yeah, they're not. I haven't written like an totally first person. I don't think. I don't know. Anyway, yeah. It is a process. It's a learning curve, that's for sure. I had a real couple of really bad habits that I think we finally beat out of me.
Well, I don't have too many more questions. I mean, I have some more questions I could ask. I don't know how much longer we want to go on. Riel's saying that she does more on the computer now than she used to.
Yeah.
She said, "I tell you, she liked the memory chair." Tess has insisted. Tess is insistent.
Tess.
I tell you, she liked the memory chair. There you go.
Oh, thank you, Tess. Thank you. I remember I went to see Riel when she was doing her book launch at Benjamin Books years ago, and Tess was so little. And I remember I watched them get out of the car, and I thought Riel was so young, and I still think you are, Riel, but I was just like, oh, she's got little kids. How does she get any writing done? Because I tried to write when my kids were young, and I did do some, but it's such a time. I feel it's a very time consuming. I like to be alone. I like to have time, and so I applaud the people that write with kids still at home. Although I've got grandchildren at home now every day, so that changes my routine a little bit. They come on the bus at 3 o'clock, but they
Oh, yeah,
usually
that's
say hi, get a snack, and get their iPads. So it's not like I'm doing much to look after them until I have to feed them supper.
that's right. One of the things that you're so good at is self-promotion. Do you have any tips for other authors who might be on the line, because you really do such a good job?
Well, that's a learning curve as well. But a lot of the things like tonight, for instance, like these things like I applied for the national reading through the Writers Union. I belong to the Writers Union. I do a lot of judging. I do peer reviews for them for membership. I believe you should, be involved in professional associations like the Federation of New Brunswick, and I belong to Canscape and that sort of thing. But you also have to kind of go for like I did the TD Children's Book Tour in 2015, which was an amazing experience. But those kinds of things, you kind of have to, do the groundwork for yourself. And I think that's part of it. Like, people say, oh, agent, no agent, should you, whatever. Like there's pros and cons to all those things, but basically you have to do some of the work yourself. Even I think, like no matter, like I said, I'm with Acorn Press, and I applaud Terry Lee and all the wonderful things she does for me. And she's always very receptive to any suggestions and very supportive. But, really, you're one author of however many, no matter who you're published with, and you've got to do your own self-promotion. So just, residencies or any kind of things that are available, you've got to look into them and figure them out, just like anything. And competitions, that's the other thing I always try to say to emerging writers. To any competition that you qualify for, send your work, because I'm judging right now in the short prose, and I'm a second round reader, so I have 18 short stories that have gotten through the first round, and they make me a better writer, because I'll read it and think, whoa, like, why does this work? Why does this not work? But to me, like, all those extra things are self-promotion in ways that will benefit you in the long run. So like I go to the farmer's market. That's been a wonderful thing, just because
Connecting with readers.
So much of it is getting new readers, and new readers will bring more readers, because they'll say, when's your next, I go with a new book in May, and then I've got people like, well, when's your next book? I'm like, well, not next week. Like, you kind of have to wait. But so like, that's just a small thing, but it's been a big payoff in many ways. So
yeah, I totally agree with that too. Like they also, like you say, doing the submissions. One of the things that drew me like to your very first book that we did, your Mrs. Montague Cried, was that it had won the Writers Fed Award.
Right.
So you do, as a publisher, you do give those things a second glance.
Yeah, exactly.
But the publisher might be on that jury, right? Like you never know. You think about how you make connections as writers. You never know who's going to be on a jury, or who's going to be at that event, or that kind of thing. So it does, all those little things do make a difference.
All those little things, exactly.
So is there any other questions in the chat here that we didn't get to? I don't think so. Does anybody else from the gallery have any questions for Sue? Feel free to turn on your unmute yourself.
I unmute myself. I'm Stella.
Hi, Stella.
Hi.
Also an Acorn author.
Here, I'll turn on my thingy here. Hi. I enjoy writing. I like to hide behind the pen. That's where I feel most comfortable sometimes, rather than speaking publicly. However, having said this, I never started writing I work outside at the home and probably always will until I either expire or retire. But my question is, are you able to make a good living from your writing? I didn't go into being a writer to earn a living. I did it for personal reasons forever, and just because I love to write. Um, but how do you do that? Like, if you have a real passion for writing, and for you, it's a career, and I have a career outside of my home. So how does one earn a living where you can make your career a livable income?
Okay. All right, Stella. Yes, I'll try to answer that. I get asked that a lot, like, when I do school visits and that sort of thing, because, how are you going to make a living as a writer?
Mhm.
And I'll say, there's only, I had heard statistics once, there's like maybe 10 to, 15 writers in Canada that could actually make a living just writing, just off their royalties. Somebody like Stephen King, whose royalties are, in the millions, and there's so many,
Mhm.
payoffs from movies and all that kind of thing. But I've heard many writers. I remember Donna Morrissey once saying that she makes most of her money from workshops, from presentations, from public readings, like all those extra things that you have to do to supplement your income. I was at a session with Sherry Fitch once, and we're the very same age. We're both born in December 1956. And she was a full-time writer while she was raising her boys, and I taught school for 29 years, and I said, our paths were very different. She tried to make a living, and she said, basically, you now have a pension and I don't, and I'm very thankful for my teacher's pension. Plus, I enjoyed my 29 years of teaching. I wouldn't trade them for anything. But as far as making a living, I would have to be really, really slogging away at doing more workshops, doing more presentations, doing making all that pay off. So it's not easy, no, to do that. So you either find a partner that makes lots of money, or you work away at something. So but yet I wouldn't discourage anyone from writing, even a young person in a high school or whatever. I say find a way to write, and then find a job that'll give you some time to write, which is teaching. I don't think everyone should be a teacher so they get the summers off, but yeah, no, it's hard to make a living, that's for sure. So you have to decide what's your priority. And like I to me it's all gravy. Like I just everything, I like, I
But
love to get my
I'm just
royalties.
going to,
I love to get my public funding.
yeah, the public lending rights, all that, the more books you do and all that makes a difference. And, the one, like it goes hand in hand with the self-promotion, like Susan, this year would probably have hurt a little bit because you haven't been able to do as many like farmers market and fairs and stuff like that. But, getting the books to the community makes a difference too, because, you can make,
like I did,
not only do you make the royalties, but you also make the margin on those, right? So,
and some years I would do like 10 writers in the school, presentations, and that would be like, one a month, a couple a month. Those are nice, a nice little, bonus. There hasn't been any this year, and there wasn't much. I think I had one last year before things started to shut down. So, those types of things. The other thing I'm getting better at, and we'll see how much better I am if I get the grant that I applied for. Applying for grants, and there's a real skill and a real technique to that you've got to look into. Like it's all experience and figuring it out and finding your way through it, and it doesn't happen overnight. But grants again, or residencies, or anything that'll give you some income while you're writing.
Great. Well,
great.
thank you for that. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Stella, and good luck with your writing.
Oh, thank you.
I see Odette. I see Odette is on there. I do want to shout out to Odette. The Wright Retreat, my adult book that comes out in the fall, is a writing retreat, and it's set right. Well, it's not set in her house really, because her house isn't really there, but it's where her house is. And I had the idea for it. Another dream thing. I dreamt about it when I was staying with Joanne and Odette a couple of summers ago, and then it blossomed when I went to Scotland and whatever. But I felt like I've been at Odette's for the last 2 years, because that was the scene, the setting of that book, and I appreciate her hospitality. I spent a couple of days there this summer just to get away from my family. That's another story. But anyway, hi to Odette. And Odette had her first book published, Teaching on Top of the World. And she's going to be a Fry emerging author this year, so that's exciting.
That's great.
Fry
Yeah.
Festival.
Someone asked about audiobooks. Yes, there's finally funding to make audiobooks, and so we're hoping for the next round that maybe one of Sue's books will be able to get the grant for that. So that gets it into a whole other audience too. So, Susan, it's 9:05. Was there a time frame that you were hoping to wrap it up, or?
Sure, I'll wrap it up anytime. Go put my jammies on.
Starting to get to be pumpkin time. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think this was wonderful to get together with you all and spend some time talking about writing and a little bit of reading and promotion. I would like to thank Susan for putting it together and for, being such a great colleague to work with. And, she's really, talented and really, such a fun author to work with for all of us. So,
Thank you.
Yeah. So
I see Ida's face. Ida, unmute yourself for 2 seconds. Ida, unmute yourself.
Okay.
There. Hi, Ida.
Hi.
Ida's in Newfoundland. She has her 3 books behind her. She's a good self-promoter as well. Hi, Ida.
Yes, and now that we're sort of wrapping it up, feel free, if you guys want to have a little friendly Zoom chat, go ahead. We don't need to worry so much about our broadband.